90 minutes now with the one canceled fight we got. So a little more time for everyone, but I know everyone's just sitting at the edge of their seat waiting for this card. So much anticipation for UFC 312. No sarcasm.
Yeah, you took me to that. So that was where I was going to go. I know on paper, but hey, listen, it's tough when you have to buy the pay-per-view, right? Like I always say this, back home, a little lucky. It's a monthly subscription, so it doesn't kill me when the cards aren't as great. But I can't speak for the rest of the world. Not the greatest fight card. I know the UFC probably rely on the fact that, Australia are always starving for events and they're going to sell out. And listen, the fans have come out. Credit to them. They've supported their local fighters. The energy's there in the open workouts, press conference, all that stuff. But kind of what do you make of the card overall?
Yeah, it's not great. I mean, this is what you get every so often with the UFC, right? Like, just given how widely they stretch their roster and lack of stars and things like that, it's hard to get fighters to go to Australia with that crazy tax they have to pay. So like that's a huge issue as well in getting, marquee big name fighters. Honestly, the past couple of cards in Australia haven't been drastically different from this. There's maybe been a little more juice to this, but like go look back at the undercard. I think of Strickland and Adesanya. I think the co-main event was tied to Avasa and like Alexander Volkov or something, and then it was like a steep fall off after that. So these are kind of the Australia events, but I do think maybe people are more excited for this just because it is a UFC event, and here we are like 5+ weeks into the year, and we've only had 3 cards so far. So I think people are still pretty like hungry and all that stuff. I'm not going to make a prediction how many pay-per-views or what kind of numbers this is going to sell. I think, this might be a struggle to get the $80 from certain fans, but I think there's people out there that are going to watch this just because it is a big UFC pay-per-view.
And I think initially when we heard that it's probably going to be Dricus and Sean Strickland, I don't think too many people were like crazy excited for multiple reasons. I know Khamzat Chimaev is out there. It seemed as though Strickland was promised a title shot with a win over Paulo Costa, right? He seemed content or confident, rather, that him sitting out was going to get him that title fight rematch, which in recent history, we've known that's not always the best decision, right? To just sit out and assume the UFC is going to give you something. But it seemed to work for Sean Strickland. Now, we know Sean Strickland garners headlines for all the maybe right or wrong reasons, depending on who you are. But what do you kind of think of Strickland being the one to challenge Du Plessis next for the title? He beat Paulo Costa to get that shot again. Are you okay with this, or would you rather seen the UFC go a different direction?
It's tricky. Just so many kind of layers to this. I mean, I know initially the government in Australia didn't want Sean Strickland on this card too badly, and this seemed like they wanted Dricus to be defending his title on this date. Could have been similar issues with Khamzat Chimaev getting into the country. As you'll notice, like he had announced a media tour during this week around Australia. All that got canceled. I think he did an interview just like an hour or so ago from some event in Russia where he was cornering a teammate. So I don't know if he would have been able to fight on this card, on this date, on this location. And I guess they managed to get Sean Strickland through there for whatever, reasons. But yeah, here we are. I mean, I think if they did promise Sean Strickland the title shot after he beat Paulo Costa, whether it was in writing or verbally and otherwise, I like the fact that they at least stood behind that and gave him his opportunity. It was a split decision first time around. He feels he was wrong. So there is like a storyline here. I don't think it's the worst title fight by any means. I want to see the Khamzat one more just because I think, like everyone, we want to see that guy fighting for a UFC title finally. But I don't think this is like a terrible alternative. There is a storyline between these guys. The first fight, maybe not the greatest in the world, but it was pretty solid and very close. So I don't mind the opportunity to see these two settle their business here.
Yeah, and Khamzat posted that he recently got the UAE passport, so that probably should help him with a lot of his issues. Maybe not enough time, obviously, for a training camp for a title fight, but Dana kind of seemed to hint that he was next. But how many headlines have I written that Khamzat Chimaev is next, right? I feel like I've written this headline, whether welterweight or middleweight, for the past 2 years. Khamzat Chimaev is next, and he never ends up being next. Do you think it's just a logistical issue, or what do you think is going on?
I don't know. There's so many rumors, so many things like that you hear. I'm sure you've heard, the same things as me over the years. You just have to look at the locations and the dates and all that kind of stuff. And maybe it does become a little more clear, but like he has fought in the US a few times. He fought as recently as the one with Kevin Holland when he was supposed to fight Nate Diaz. That was like, 2 years ago or something. So I don't know. I think with the change in presidential administration in the United States and Dana White's relationship with Donald Trump, Dana said it, I think, as recently as was it the last pay-per-view where he got asked about Hamzat, and he said it might have been in Saudi just last week. Like he said, I don't think that's going to be an issue for him. So I'd like to think we're all good to go. It seems like he's figured out his training and his health and like all those kind of stuffs and has the right people around him. So if it's not now, it feels like it's going to be never type of thing. Like he's in position, the timing lines up. I don't know when that fight would be. Obviously, will be depending on how this main event goes tonight and injuries and things like that coming out of this. But if it's Dricus who wins, I think they both really want that Hamzat fight. And if you're the champion and you're getting pay-per-view points, like Hamzat, that pay-per-view is going to sell for sure. And you want to be the champion in that position. So if I was both those guys, I would be, keen to get that booked as well.
Yeah, I mean, if Strickland wins, I think it's got to be the U.S., right? Who's going to win Sean Strickland? Not going to be Abu Dhabi. It's not going to be any of those locations. If Strickland wins, we're going to have to stick with the U.S. Dricus, maybe they could go global with Dricus fought in Canada.
Yeah, South Africa, right? That's what we're doing this year.
Apparently. I don't know.
My hopes up, but we'll see.
We'll see. But yeah, like you mentioned earlier, the first fight was a split decision. So when you look at it like that, it's not crazy or outrageous that he is getting his title fight rematch. Super close fight. Strickland's adamant that he won. What did you think on the spot? You were there, right? You were there.
Yeah, I was just down the street here in Toronto. So,
there you go. Yeah. What did you think on the spot? And I'm sure you've rewatched it. Did you change your opinion? Like, who do you feel like won?
I thought Du Plessis won. It was close. I can't remember the exact rounds, but I think it was like a 3-2 type of fight. I thought like the thing that kind of stands out to me, and even though he didn't do a ton with it, he had some kind of high impact takedowns at certain key points in that fight. And I think it got him over a little bit more. It was just a little emphatic. He didn't really, get much ground and pound or submission attempts or anything like that, but he just was able to mix up his game a little bit more. These two obviously have very different feelings about the cut that opened up over Sean Strickland's eye. Sean feels it was a clash of heads. Dricus said it was a punch. But Sean clearly feels that radically changed the entire fight for him, and that he was having to battle through vision issues with the blood and all that stuff, and he just wasn't able to get his game off. But he said that fight was going easy for him before that happened. You can believe that or not, but that's very interesting to me, at least coming into this fight. Like he feels if there was not for that kind of issue and, something like that could easily happen again. Of course it's a fight, but he seems to think like he was on his way to a clear win. I don't think Dricus is that same guy. I think he has championship confidence now. So it's going to be a little bit different, but yeah, that first fight, I do think Dricus was the rightful winner. I picked him to win. He won. And I do still think he was the winner there, but it was close for sure.
Now, odds makers, according to BetMGM, they have Du Plessis minus 220, Strickland at plus 180. I think that's understandable, considering obviously Dricus got his hand raised the first time, and then he's coming off of the finish of Adesanya, whereas Strickland is coming off of a unanimous decision over Paulo Costa in June. You think the odds are fair?
Yeah, I think that's about right. I mean, Dricus, he's the champion, got that title defense on this crazy winning streak. No one's been able to figure him out in the UFC. Sean, to his credit, definitely came close to beating him. But yeah, I think that you got to have Du Plessis as the favorite here. And we'll see if he can hold serve, because that confidence coming off that Izzy win has got to be huge for him. And he's just got like this, you could see coming into the first fight as the challenger and now is like a standing defending champion. He's just got a different level of confidence about him. And he's always been the guy who's been very sure of his skill set, even though everyone has been very doubtful of it.
Including myself. Listen, after watching his wins over Brunson and Darren Till, I'm like, it's the same thing with me with Yuri Prohaska. A lot of times when I keep breaking things down and I keep watching him fight, I'm like, no, like I can't get myself to pick them because I see what I see in the fights. But then, I was wrong when Prohaska fought Jamal Hill. Earlier on, I was wrong with Dricus. But then it reaches a point where I feel like, all right, I'm going to stop betting against this guy or picking against this guy. Mm-hmm. But, I mean, what he's done recently, we talked about Toporia's back-to-back wins over Volkanovski and Holloway being incredible. The stretch that Dricus has had with Whitaker, Strickland, and Adesanya is also a fantastic winning streak. Do you think until now people continue to underestimate Dricus, or do you feel like he's reached a point? Because we see those videos of Whitaker and Adesanya kind of laughing. They're giving him his respect, and they call him the best shit fighter, I believe is what Adesanya called him in the world. Do you feel like he's starting to get that respect, or do you feel like people still doubt him?
I do. I think a lot of people that I'm seeing predicting this fighters, even like Adesanya and Whitaker themselves, they're all seemingly picking Dricus. I do think a lot of that is circumstantial. If he was fighting Khamzat Chimaev in the spot, I think everyone would be saying he's going to get whipped, right? And he would be the underdog. That's my opinion. I think a lot of people would agree with that. So the fact that we have seen him fight Sean, he won. I think a lot of people can look at that first fight, look at him now, and even though there's only been one in between, can say Dricus is improved and everything I just said earlier about the confidence in his game and everything. So I think that plays kind of a big factor here. Like, we know the situation, so that's why he is getting a little more respect here. But I think if it was Chimaev, we'd be hearing a lot of the same stuff we've heard before previous fights. But I agree wholeheartedly with you. Like, I picked against Dricus a number of fights in a row. I do think I picked him in the first Strickland fight, but other ones I remember picking against him more often than not. Now I'm on the train of being like, I'm not picking against him again until I actually see him lose.
And you mentioned the word improved. Do you feel like he's actually improved from fight to fight, or do you just feel like the way this guy fights, like, I don't want to like disrespect him by saying I don't feel like he fights with a game plan, but he just seems to like outgrit people, like he outbattle people. You know what I'm saying? So do you feel like, have you seen improvement from Dricus fight to fight, or do you feel like he just has an ability to outlast these guys?
Well, it does feel like he turned a corner, and I know to some people it might sound goofy when he did have that nasal surgery, right? That he said was like messing with his breathing and his cardio in a lot of those early fights that you mentioned against Till and Brunson. So like, it does feel like, even though maybe you can't sit there and be like, wow, like I've seen his jab get like, more fundamental and like certain things, we know that's not how he fights. Like, and clearly this is working for him. So why would he try to like refine that to a significant degree? But I feel like he's improved on the knowledge on how to use his skill set in the most effective manner in these fights against these guys. And we've seen that. I mean, he becomes the first person to submit Adesanya in MMA. And I know, like, again, it's not like he's going out there, and we're not talking about him like Khabib, like he's never lost a round. Like, he pretty much loses a round in every single one of his fights. But when he's coming out and getting the finish in that same fight, or, that's what makes the Strickland one interesting, is he didn't get the finish and it was a very close decision. You could say he lost, but like mostly against these other guys, he's figuring it out, and it's just highly effective. I mean, it's hard to sit here and say, but I think that's kind of like what he's grown on the most, is just knowing how to make what he does much more effective than maybe he did earlier in his career.
Yeah, and he's finishing guys. And I didn't mean to be disrespectful by saying that, because you mentioned in the first fight, obviously he used the takedowns to secure the round. So obviously he knew what he was doing, especially when those rounds are super close. Let's start with Dricus. What do you feel like he has to do differently in this rematch to make sure it's not such a close fight?
I don't know. It's honestly tough. Like, I do feel like this might be another pretty close fight. Obviously, the finish, like, just find a path to that, whether it's through a big strike, or if he can establish position when he does get those takedowns and, threaten with a submission, that's obviously a path to victory for him. But I don't think Sean Strickland's been submitted in MMA either. And he is pretty good at getting up off his back. We talk about how good his defense and stuff like that is. So I don't know. Like, I don't know what to think of this. If it's going to be a boring fight, I have a hard time imagining Dricus being in, a fight that's like super bad. But Sean Strickland is very good defensively, and we hear that from everyone leading into this. So I don't know. Like, he just needs to hurt him and show that killer instinct that's led him to, I think, whatever he has, like an 80 to 90% finishing rate in his career. But those opportunities are going to be hard to come by. So if he finds one, he better find a way to take advantage.
And we talked about the first fight being close, and how I agree with you. I do believe this one's going to be pretty close as well. Do you think it's wise for him to employ a heavier grappling strategy? Because managing energy is obviously very important, especially the way Dricus fights. A lot of energy exerted in everything he does, right? So do you think it's wise to advise him to kind of enforce more of a grappling strategy, especially that we've seen him show off a submission game as well? Submitted Darren Till, submitted Adesanya.
Yeah, I would definitely try it like early in the fight and just see what Sean's defense is looking like in this particular bout. And if he's able to, even if he's not able to keep him down long, like, at least test those waters, I would say, in the first 5 to 7 minutes. And then if you find success, you go back to it whenever, it works for you. If you see Sean tiring or you see a big opening for it. But yeah, like if he goes in there and he's not shooting any takedowns throughout the fight, I think that would be a disservice to him. So I think he'll do what he does. He always kind of mixes it up pretty well. And even if he doesn't find success, he kind of keeps going to it. So yeah, I'm not expecting anything vastly different from Dricus than what he usually does in this fight. It's just how is Sean Strickland going to respond to it is what I'm more curious about.
And yeah, before we move on to Strickland and his strategy, I'm sure you caught Dricus talking about in Embedded saying how he feels this could be the greatest middleweight performance. Did he say middleweight championship or middleweight performance? But regardless, considering Anderson Silva reigned over that division for so long, that's a pretty bold statement, right? What do you make of him saying that? Do you think it's considering the first fight was super close, do you think this is just confidence because of the stretch of victories that he's had? And do you feel like we're going to see some sort of incredible, emphatic performance from Dricus?
If we did, that would be spectacular. I mean, I sit here, I think we're 1 day past the 14-year anniversary of Anderson Silva front kicking Vitor Belfort in the face. So you think of that and be like, okay, good luck topping anything remotely even close to that. Might be the greatest highlight in UFC history, or one of them, to be certain. So he's got a long road to climb in terms of that stuff. We have seen Dricus when he does finish guys, like he's not necessarily doing it in a one punch face plant KO or something crazy like that. It's like, he gets a dominant position, pounds them out, or like gets a knockdown and then kind of swarms them like he did with Whitaker. So yeah, that's a bold statement. But again, like I'm not going to hate on him. Dricus is clearly a very confident guy. He's well spoken. And if he wants to put that out into the universe, it's something that could obviously backfire on him or something that could be a driving force. And if he does do it, he just looks even better in the win.
Yeah, very witty on the mic as well. He's got some of the best comebacks.
Yeah, the press conference definitely didn't meet their standards from their previous two. It was a little lackluster there, but yeah, nevertheless.
Yeah, are you surprised by that, or do you feel like Dricus just? I mean, I feel like he's more of a snapback type of guy rather than. Well, actually, he did instigate some. He's made a couple people cry, so I don't know. Yeah. Like, were you surprised?
It was not necessarily. I think what's more to be said between these two guys, right? Like it's just been building up for such a long time. They did a ton of media leading up to this. We've got all the things, the worst things that can be said between them have already been said. So what can you do to, I guess, top that if that's what you're looking for? So no, I'm not surprised. It's a little different. I mean, I think the big storyline coming out of that press conference, I'm sure it'll come up as we get into Sean Strickland, was like, potential staph infection on his arm and him sitting there in a sleeveless shirt, giving it all for the world to see. That was an interesting decision.
He's immune to it, is what he said. Yeah, I mean, that looks. How it works. I mean, that looks. Yeah, I don't know what else it could be outside of staph. I don't buy the rumors that we see on social media, but there were rumors about him not feeling well. I feel like social media has gone worse than it ever has in terms of these random accounts just spreading rumors. So it's kind of hard to tell whether there's any substance to anything anyone says. But Caio Borralho was out there. I don't know if this was kind of pre-planned from the UFC, considering we talked about how this card wasn't the greatest. So I could assume if they lost the main event, they would have been in big trouble, right?
Yeah, that would have been very bad. Hopefully nothing happens here in the next few hours and we did just jinx it. But yeah, I think Caio was there as well to corner Bruno Brazil, who I think he's in a relationship with. So yeah, I mean, I'm sure if something crazy happened, he would have jumped in there and did what he had to do. But I think we're here at the finish line. Again, I don't know the extent of this whole Sean Strickland situation. I think it's pretty evident that was staph infection on his arm. You can't really deny it. It's just a question of, is he past it? Is he still on antibiotics? If so, did that mess with his weight cut? Has it made it more difficult to train? How much time did he potentially have to take off and when and all that kind of stuff? But like, I'm not worried about him going in there and, being like anything like that where it's going to cancel it at this point or have like an impact. I think the worst is behind it in terms of it threatening the fight. It's just how much could it potentially impact Sean Strickland when he's in there for a multitude of reasons.
To the death, as he says, but
to the decision.
so, so is that okay? Well, we'll get before we get into your kind of official prediction. I'll give you some individual odds, courtesy of BetMGM. So I mentioned earlier that Du Plessis is a -220 favorite, Strickland being +180. Strickland by TKOs +750, 2,200 for submission, +250 for decision. And then for Du Plessis, we've got +350 for TKO, +450 submission, +150 decision. Where are you leaning?
I think Du Plessis, I mean, decision, I think on one side or the other is probably the safest bet. That's where I'd probably lay my money if I was going to. And then I guess whatever side you're most confident on winning, it could be a coin toss in that sense, right? I think it might go down to the wire. So, yeah, like I picked Du Plessis, so I guess I'll stay true to that and say I feel like the most likely outcome is him by decision again.
Same. And this is one of those weird ones because sometimes when I'll make a prediction, I'll keep going back and forth, back and forth. This is one of those weird ones where I haven't. I don't have a particular reason for it, but I've been kind of Du Plessis the whole week. There are other times where sometimes we'll kind of like nitpick at random silly stuff and be like, oh, okay, maybe this guy. But this is one of those. I do believe it's going to be a close fight, but I do think just based off of impact, and although I know a lot of people talk about how marked up Du Plessis' face was in the first fight, but the cut didn't help Sean Strickland at all. But yeah, I'm going Du Plessis. Now the co-main event, which Tatiana Suarez called the people's main event. Do you agree?
No. I'm still in favor of this fight. I mean, you can say I know people don't like these two guys for various reasons, but Dricus Du Plessis, I still think like he's one of the 7 best pound for pound fighters in the UFC's ranking, or 8 or something. So it's hard for me to go over that. Like, that's not to slight these women. I think the card is in its rightful spot, and yeah, but I'm more anticipating the result and the fallout of the main event. But the co-main event could be a better and more compelling fight as it happens.
Yeah, no, I understand. No, I agree. Like even though I wasn't kind of like crazy over them rematching, I think both have done a very good job, like DDP and Strickland, in terms of selling this fight. Mm-hmm. Strickland, I don't want to go into the stuff he said or the political stuff because obviously me personally, I'm not going to be a fan of what he says. But hey, he made the front cover of the Daily Telegraph, and the UFC was posting it everywhere on social media. So that was interesting.
What a weird week it's been, huh? Holy cow.
Yeah, from the statement on Bryce Mitchell to now post. I don't know. Okay, no comment. Let's move on to the co-main event. It is still a very compelling fight between Tatiana Suarez and Zhang Weili. Now, Tatiana is one of those fighters, I guess you could say, similar to Hamza. We're always like title shot. But obviously her reasons have been completely different. A lot of injuries, but she's finally here. She was the one, right? She was the one for Zhang Weili. It was weird when she got pulled from that Verna Jandiroba fight. I saw her in Abu Dhabi. She was with Patchy Mix, who was competing in ADXC. And I was kind of trying to like find out what was going on, but something told me I felt like she was healthy and I kind of knew what was going on. But what do you kind of make of the UFC pulling her from that fight and putting her in the title fight?
I think it was fine because they should have done this fight anyways, right? Like, I think the Verna fight made no sense. Just because you like, who else is Weili fighting? She's beat or fought pretty much everyone else that's interesting or in her orb in terms of contender at this point. And those are the two that you're like, okay, one of these two should be getting a title shot. Is Tatiana even healthy though? Can she fight for the title? And I guess the answer to that was yes. So they went forward with this fight. So it makes perfect sense here. I think Verna's standing as good as she's looked lately, like Mackenzie Dern getting the win that she did and having the win over Verna, I think hurts a little bit. But yeah, this was the fight to make. It's just a question of where is Tatiana at? Like, even if she wasn't healthy, I couldn't imagine she would have turned down this opportunity, right? Like, this is it. She's 34 years old. She's been in the UFC since 2016 or 2017. Maybe it's a little later than that, but it's been a long time now. So like you gotta take this opportunity now and go for it. And I think the UFC felt the same way putting it here. You just wonder if she wins, what kind of champion can she be?
Yeah, 2016 when she won the Ultimate Fighter, but obviously been very injury plagued. I think a lot of people compare her career to Khabib, right? Except you just mentioned she's 34 now. Like Khabib obviously went through a lot of injuries and people were wondering, is this guy ever going to live up to his potential? Is he ever going to stay healthy and compete? So similar roads in that regard with such high expectations, but them obviously being unfortunate with the injuries. But I'm pretty sure, let me recheck the odds. She was a favorite last I checked last night. She still is, because the odds have closed a little bit. She's a minus 165 favorite over Zhang Weili, plus 135. Considering the work that Zhang Weili has done and how good and well-rounded she's looked, are you surprised? And Tatiana coming off a layoff, I know she's undefeated and she comes from a great wrestling background, but are you surprised to see that she's the favorite over Zhang?
A little bit, yeah. I think it's the first time or second time Weili's been the underdog in the UFC. So, yeah, like that goes to show what people think and the public sentiment is around Tatiana Suarez. She's obviously really good and she's beaten a number of former UFC champions, but Weili, I think we could say like this is her in her prime right now. This is her strongest form. She's been extremely solid in the second title reign she's had at strawweight. So I actually picked Weili, which I think I might be alone on an island there on that MMA Junkie staff picks. Maybe, I have one or two other people there, but yeah, like I don't know. It's just one of those ones, like if Tatiana at her full potential, healthy with momentum, all that stuff, I think is an extremely tough fight. But if we get into a world there where like, I don't think the striking is close between these two.
Yeah.
If we see in the first round, Tatiana's like struggling to get those takedowns and, she's hanging on to the ankle and like face planting into the mat and stuff as well. Like, limp legs and steps away and all those type of things are going to be like, oh, like, I don't think this could be great. And then, some punches start coming in and momentum kind of builds for the champ there. So like if Weili wins, I think will be kind of what it looks like on her side. And I think she's very capable of doing that. I picked her I don't know, more on a hunch than anything, but I do think she has path to victory here.
Yeah, and look, I picked Tatiana Suarez. Sometimes I get kind of wrapped up in people's storylines. Obviously, Tatiana has a great storyline of the adversity that she's gone through, so many high expectations. She was an Olympic wrestling hopeful, undefeated, has just not been able to stay active, hasn't fought since August 2023. But I tend to sometimes get swayed into buying into hype. But hearing you say what you say, yeah, I actually... Because if you ask me, can I see a world where Tatiana is Gilbert Burns said he sees Tatiana Habibing Zhang Weili. Like, do I see a world where that happens? I don't know, because Zhang Weili is strong and she can grapple. I'm not expecting her to necessarily take Tatiana or even try to go there. But, she's no slouch on the ground. So, yeah, I did pick Tatiana, but it's funny. Like, I can describe to you Zhang Weili's path to victory basically the way you did, a lot better than Tatiana's, if that makes sense. Yeah, I picked Tatiana, so it's tough.
Yeah, it's a super interesting fight. Like, probably one of the better fights you can make in women's MMA right now. So I'm glad they did this, and we'll find out a lot of unknowns about Tatiana here, right? Like, even though she has beat a lot of very solid fighters, obviously Weili is kind of on a different level right now. This is a huge spot. She has an experience, like, there's going to be a lot kind of on her mentally. And then obviously we just don't even know where she's at physically, but she seems to be in a good place, looked good on the scale at weigh-ins and things like that. So a huge opportunity for her. If she wins, she'll be the 15th fighter in UFC history to win a title with an undefeated record. So that's like a very exclusive club to be in.
There you go. That's just why we bring Mike for the stats. even relationships. I don't know Caio Borralho and
There you go.
There you go. But yeah, so she's a minus 165 favorite. Individual odds here, we got plus 275 Zhang Weili by TKO. Now, I know I didn't pick her, but that's tempting. Plus 1400 Zhang Weili by submission, plus 275 Zhang Weili by decision. And for Suarez, it's plus 350 decision, plus 225 submission, and plus 700 TKO. So odds seem to suggest that her best path to victory is by submission. So, yeah, that's interesting. Considering Zhang Weili's, she's never been submitted though, Zhang Weili, but it's interesting regardless.
Yeah, I do think that would be Tatiana's path. Like, you could see her just jumping on a guillotine, like as they get kind of close, or if she is dominant on the ground. I could see Weili kind of making a silly mistake and getting her back taken and choked there. So I do think there is some paths in terms of the grappling. And then on Weili's side, I think her by, TKO or decision are the most likely things. I don't really see a submission scenario on her end.
And it's 5 rounds as well. Tatiana, that's when I would have liked to see her get booked in a 5-round fight night main event. They've done it tons of times with Mackenzie Dern and stuff like that. I just feel at this point she could have really benefit. I know she hasn't been able to stay healthy, but
yeah, did they ever do that in one of the fights she fell out of? I'm looking now. I don't think any of these.
I
Were ever
don't think so. I don't.
main
I don't
event.
remember Suarez's name on a main event or some
No, me neither.
closer. Yeah, yeah. It's interesting. Obviously, I understand the UFC's push towards her, and I think she deserves to fight for the title. I mean, I've wanted to see her fight for the title for a while. But how much of a factor do you think that's going to play, considering Zhang Weili's championship experience, training for 5 rounds multiple times, whereas Suarez hasn't fought since August 2023 and never been or even trained for a 5-round fight?
Yep. All great points. I think those are all definitely factors. Also, like this is technically Zhang Weili's kind of side of the world, right? Like not the same degree of travel, of jet lag, of all those kind of things. I know Tatiana, I think, has been over there for a bit. So like, I assume she did everything right in that regard, but it is weird. Like they're going to be fighting at 11 in the morning or around noon Australia time on Sydney. I've covered a few of those cards over there in Australia now, and like it is weird when the first fight's popping off at 6 a.m. and the main event's happening around noon. So you can't discount kind of just all those outside elements. And then as you said, like hasn't been in the scenario of a championship fight, hasn't been on a card of this magnitude in terms of like the spot, and then you factor in the layoff and fighting a great champion, one of the best the women's side has ever seen. It's a lot of factors. So if she is able to overcome those and win, I think that would make it all the more impressive for her to get this done.
Yeah, and when you hear Zhang Weili talking about moving up a weight class, do you find that kind of concerning? Do you feel like her mind's in the wrong place, considering that she's an underdog going into this fight, or what were your thoughts of her talking about flyweight?
I feel like she's been talking about it for a little bit now,
Yeah.
so it's not overly concerning, and I get it. Like if she wins this fight, and especially if she washes Tatiana out there and wins dominantly, like I guess the Verna fight, if she wins, she's booked against someone else now, against Yan Jianan, I believe. So
Yes.
like that's probably a title eliminator. But if Xiaonan wins, we just saw that at UFC 300, and Verna would be worthy of a title shot, but that's like kind of a tough sell, I think, on the UFC's end a little bit. So you might have to explore something different. And from what she said, like remember, I think it was a fight night randomly in like October and November, and Ken Hathaway, our videographer, asked Dana at one of the Contender Series cards again about like what's going on with Weili, and he's like, "Oh, like she was in town for this fight. We had such a great meeting. We're going to announce something soon, etc., etc." And then we didn't hear anything, and then she ends up on this card like months later. From what I've kind of heard her say throughout this week, like those discussions were about her going to 125 and fighting Valentina Shevchenko. So this does seem like a real thing that's had like legs to it. Timing didn't work out now for whatever reason that they may be, but I do think if she goes through this, like that's definitely back on the table. But yeah, I don't think she's not talking about it like overly. She's only talking about it when people ask her directly about it. I feel like I spoke with her briefly during fight week and watched her media day and everything, and it's all like focus on the fight type of stuff. So I'm not necessarily worried about that with her.
Fair enough. And we talk about kind of the greatest strawweights of all time. Joanna's name is pretty much, I think, what people would respond. Obviously, Rose Namajunas. Interesting history of Rose Namajunas having the 2 wins over both Joanna and Zhang Weili. But where do you feel like Zhang Weili can reach a point where she surpasses Joanna as the greatest strawweight, and does beating Tatiana give her that?
I'm gonna say no, not yet. It's a tough, like you said, there's that kind of that trio that it's all revolving around a little bit. It makes it a little bit tough, but I'd have to sit down and like really look at it. But I think she is definitely right there. I don't think you could discount her. But to make herself undeniable, I think breaking Joanna's title defense record would be a pretty big deal for her. I think that's at 5, and this would be 3 in this reign. So she's on her way. I think she can get there, and I think that would be the one that would really put all this stuff to rest. And then, as Rose kind of gets further away and in a different division, and she's losing some fights and getting late in her career and thing like that, if Weili kind of continues to dominate and sustain her winning path beyond when Rose completely falls off, I think that would be big for her as well.
But that's the issue, right? I mean, I got asked about Issam like wanting to move up to welterweight, and I'm like, no, like this is finally a champion that I feel like could reign over his division. Like, what's up with the champions not wanting to notch those title defenses? Because we nitpick when we talk about greats, right? We always look at because they're all so good. So you have to look at these, all right, title defenses. That's why we talk about GSP and Demetrius Johnson and Anderson Silva and John Jones. That's why they're most people's top 4, because we talk about title defenses. But this day and age, it doesn't seem like that is the interest. I'll put an asterisk on Pantoja because he's talked about title defenses, and I respect the way
just saw an interview with him like a few days ago where he said he wants to fight Merab at bantamweight now.
Why? I was discrediting him. He just ruined everything. Okay, I guess not.
But his actions are showing like he's continuing to defend that belt. But yeah, it was funny because he said I'm no longer interested, and then now he's calling out Merab. But
yeah, but it's like, what's the issue? Like, I like, you're no longer interested after 2 or 3 title defenses. Like, now this is when I start respecting the fighters from the past, because it's hard to stay motivated, right? And I guess that's what makes John Jones so great, is that he stayed motivated through generations of fighters. Granted that some of them were closer fights and not so impressive performances, but this day and age, are we going to be able to call any of these champions, these great, well-rounded champions, the Zhang Weilis, the Islam Makhachevs, divisional greats or even all-time greats, if they're not defending their belts?
It's going to be trickier, and we're definitely going to have to adjust our perspective and context, because, you know, like, as amazing as Anderson Silva and George St. Pierre and Demetrius Johnson, like the 3 longest title reigns in UFC history, when they were in their prime years, the quality of competition was not what it is today. And the fighters and the sport is just on such a higher level. Everyone is better. So it's harder to get to those type of numbers, 6, 7, 8 title defenses. Like, it's almost impossible now with how good all these guys are. So it makes things really,
though.
yeah, 100%. No, I agree. Yeah. Like, so I don't know if I'm not trying to say like guys are looking at their divisions and being like, I want to duck this next contender by going up a weight class. I mean, I don't necessarily think fighting the champion in another division is a significantly easier fight than fighting the top contender in your own weight class. They're all the elite of the elite, but maybe they see the bigger upside in that. It does seem like the philosophy has changed from, at one point, being the dominant long-reigning champion was valuable, and it seems like somewhere along the way with Conor McGregor and Amanda Nunes and whomever, it seemed there's more value to having those 2 titles over your shoulders if you can do it. But it has never worked out. No one has, besides Nunes, but one of her divisions was a non-real division, who's been able to maintain fighting in 2 weight classes. So it's almost just like an unrealistic goal. But if you can join that extremely exclusive club, I think of 7 or 8 fighters who have won titles in 2 divisions, it's huge. But it's just, I don't think what the fans are craving for as much now. They want to see that stuff, certain circumstances excluded, of course.
And yeah, because now, like, you look at a Kamaru Usman, would you put him number 2? 5 title defenses, put him as the number 2. I'm assuming you wouldn't put him over your Canadian George St. Pierre. So would you say Kamaru Usman, would you say is 2nd greatest welterweight of all time, or do you have a different opinion?
No, I think he got there. I think he passed Matt Hughes as kind of being, number 2 there. So yeah, I'm comfortable with him with the 15-fight winning streak in the UFC with the title reigns he had. So yeah, I think that was a good one for him.
So Adesanya had 5 title defenses. Is he the 2nd greatest middleweight after Anderson Silva?
Yeah.
Okay, so
who would be the other option at this point in your mind?
Well, yeah, you see the point I'm trying to get at, right? So the title defenses amount to something, and that's kind of the criteria we're still at, right? This is kind of like the way we measure it. So yeah, I mean, Dricus Du Plessis talking about light heavyweight, and Bilal's talking about middleweight. Like, I don't know. That's it.
Yeah,
I mean,
we'll see how it unfolds. I feel pretty confident that like we're not going to get too much of that champ versus champ stuff. It's nice to get your name in the headlines and get people fired up and us talking about it. In reality, like the amount of times UFC has actually booked these fights is pretty limited in the grand scope. I mean, it's definitely been like 10 times more in the last 15 years of the UFC than it was in the first 15. But as time goes on, I think like it's just going to be circumstantial. I think there'll only be a few instances where this happens. And then you look at half these guys anyways, they're saying they're not going to fight each other, Islam and Bilal and like all that stuff. So it's a crapshoot, but I think we're in the name of the game of making headlines. And that's what a lot of these guys are seeing an easy path to doing by talking about changing weight classes.
Yeah, and I'm guilty of writing every single one of those headlines. So.
Of course, we ask the questions as well, so we're complicit in this. But I mean, it is interesting, of course. Like super fights are what define the sport, and they're the biggest moments and things like that. And we don't get them too often. And UFC has a semi-shortage on stars, so these guys are trying to make their money. And I think the best way they see to do it is to fight another champion.
Yeah, I agree. And before we wrap up, I do want to talk about probably the third most fight that people are excited on this card, obviously for the obvious reasons in the storylines, but Colby Thickness and Alexander Topuria. Obviously, Colby Thickness being a training partner of Volkanovski, and Alexander Topuria being the older brother of Ilya Topuria, who in an interview with Kevin Iole said he basically, once Ilya got the phone call to fight Volkanovski for the title, he put his MMA career on the side to help his brother. But, you know, Ilya told you he's better than me. Merab's talking about how good he is. I don't know if you've gotten much time to watch any of his footage, if there's really too much out there, but obviously he's going to be very hyped for the obvious reasons. But what are you kind of expecting from him?
I don't really know. You look at his tape, like he does, and some of the videos that you'll see, like of him working with Ilya, it seems like they try to implement similar like movements and tactics and things like that, but it's being made a lot of this week. What's the combined record of his opponents? Like, you know, was it 15 and like 68 or something like that? I don't know. Don't quote me on those numbers, but it is like a significant losing record for the opponents he's had. So it's hard to judge off that. And, you know, the guy he's fighting is unproven in the UFC as well. The most interesting part of this is obviously like the team storyline, having Volk and Ilya in the corners of these guys. But in terms of the fight itself, like, I'm not expecting some super high level MMA fight between these guys. I think it'll look like two UFC debuting guys fighting each other.
Yeah, but it's crazy because it's a lot different than, obviously I followed Ilya's career for a while, so I knew how good he was. But when he short notice debuted against Yusuf Zalal, no one was talking about him. Like it wasn't like, oh my God, Ilya. And it's crazy to think about that card. It was Ilya, Tom Aspinall, and Dricus, I think, all made their UFC debut on that card. Yeah, so nobody was really talking about, oh my God, you got to watch this guy. If anything, they probably thought Zalal was going to win that fight. But here, the amount of pressure and expectation on Alexander Topuria, obviously with his brother saying what he's saying about him being better than him, and Merab like amping him up, and Guram amping him up as well. I think looking at the odds over here is a minus 325 favorite. Do you think this stuff is going to get to him? He seemed very level-headed in the interviews I've watched him talk, but do you think that pressure could get to him, that the expectations are so freaking high for him, right?
It's definitely possible. We'll have to see. I mean, I guess another footnote with the stats side, him fighting will make the 36th pair of siblings who have ever competed in the UFC. So there's a lot of those. And I mean, this is not taking a shot at anyone in particular, but like scroll down the list at someone on MMA Junkie in the recent days, there's usually the good brother and then the brother who doesn't find that much success, you know, from their sibling. It's kind of happened. There's a few exceptions, of course, but you know, like that's a hard standard to live up to when your brother is an undefeated UFC champion who just was the fighter of the year in the opinion of many. So it's going to be very tricky. I see Goes weighing in on our private chat, you know, the brother of the great Gorgeous George, our MMA Junkie radio. I wasn't talking about you guys. Okay. I was just talking about the fighters, but yeah, I mean, it's an impossible standard to meet up. So he goes in there, I think just winning like in this situation would be all you need here, and then you kind of move on with your own career and, you know, not have this weird thing where you have Ilya and Volk in the corner. I mean, like, what's going to happen after this fight? Are we going to get a title fight announcement when they're like in the cage after this one ends, and then it'll just be completely overshadowed by these two? Maybe.
All right.
I mean, I can see it.
I feel like if he doesn't go out there and get a first round knockout, everyone's gonna just unfairly pile on him. I mean,
if you're Ilya, and it would be self-inflicted to a degree. I mean, for Ilya to come out and say to me and to others, I'm sure, that he is better than me, like that is what would even like make us feel comfortable with like assessing something like that. Be like, oh wow, like even if he went and got a 10-second knockout, we wouldn't be like, this guy's definitely better than Ilya, who's the champion, and then, you know, he's at bantamweight, which is ridiculously stacked. So yeah, like you said, it's an impossible situation, I think, for him at least.
At least all we can say is he had a better debut than Ilya, because Ilya went the distance in one very rare occasion of going the distance in his debut. So at least maybe he could have that headline. But I mean, nonetheless, it seems like even hearing the pop from the crowd, obviously, Colby Thickness being a training partner of Volkanovski and fighting on home turf. Have you managed to watch anything of his? What do you kind of think? Seems like he's more of a submission ground guy. Like, what do you Have you gotten an opportunity to check him out at all, or what are your thoughts on him?
Not too much. I think the UFC kind of put out like a little hype video on, I think it was one of its Instagram accounts, might have been the Australia one or something, that like showed some stuff with both these guys. So like that's basically the extent of what I've really seen on him. Some stuff Volk has shared. So like Volk speaks extremely highly of him, right? Says he was going to be here regardless, all these kind of things. So I assume he'll be ready. I mean, guys who come out of those gyms are always, going to be well trained, all that kind of stuff. I'm sure in the back of his mind somewhere, he always hopes if someone falls out on short notice on a UFC card here, maybe I'll slide on and make my debut. So I think he'll be ready for this as well, but definitely nowhere the same level of like attention or expectations or anything on him going into this fight. I think the most people are talking about him is because of his cool name.
What is it? It's slickness, thickness.
Thickness? I don't know.
Yeah, it's like, is it slickness as actual nickname?
We'll wait for the fight to start. John Anik will give us the perfect enunciation.
There you go. But before I want to wrap up with the main event again, but before that, is there any fight, maybe not fight, but fighter that stands up? Jimmy Crute's coming back, Jack Jenkins.
Jimmy Crute. You don't know Jimmy Crute? The OGs will remember that reference. No, there's not too many. I mean, Tolishin Teixeira, I guess, is like somewhat interesting. Super tall heavyweight, making his debut off a Contender Series guy. Like we're begging for literally anything. Tom Aspinall is literally begging for anything interesting to happen in this heavyweight division. So please, and Justin Taffa, we know what we get from the Taffa brothers. It's just so. That's pretty much it outside of this. I mean, there might be a few people, I think a couple of people in the chat on YouTube I was looking wanted to talk about the opening fight of the card. Do you have any thoughts on the Anshul Jubilee fight there, Farah?
He does good numbers for us. I'll say that. When I interviewed him in Abu Dhabi, I was surprised at the amount of views. I know he was criticized heavily for his fight against Mike Breeden, who I believe barked in his face. But
yes, forgot about that.
before he was knocked out. But he'll have his fan base watching, and I think the UFC would love to invest in the Indian market. Like I said, he's very, very popular. He's got a big following. He does very big numbers on social media. I'm sure the UFC will try and push him as much as they can, but that should be a fun fight. I think Jack Jenkins and Gabriel Santos as well. Listen, the names aren't like strikingly popular, but Francisco Prado, Jake Matthews could be a good one as well. So
the White Kong one, I guess, would be another one worth highlighting a little bit, just because, suffered one of the biggest losses in UFC history in her most recent fight. And we were trying to do a little Alex Pereira, Israel Adesanya thing with her and Valentina Shevchenko, but that lost its momentum in devastating fashion. But she's back pretty quick here, honestly, given that fight where she did take some damage, it was choked, all that stuff. So I'm curious to see how she responds, because I don't think that whole thing is dead yet. But if she goes out there and wins emphatically and gets on the mic and says some Joker references and calls out Valentina again, I think there's maybe a little bit of a push that we could start with that again.
Yeah, like Bruno Brazil coming out with the Batman and the Wayans, but
that was a great idea from her. I mean, that's two great names there, Wang Kong and Bruno Brazil. I mean, what more do you want?
Well, speaking, you mentioned Alex Pereira, who's going to be in Sean Strickland's corner. There was a lot said. Granted, I wrote a lot of those headlines with Daniel Cormier questioning Alex Pereira being in the corner. I think he was already supposed to be there, right? If I'm not mistaken. I don't think, or did he travel especially to corner Strickland?
I don't know, because I think there was some talk of him being there at one point, but then his fight gets announced for next month, and then I don't know how that impacted the plans and all that type of stuff. But he went. He's a loyal friend, I guess, or apparently he hates Dricus that much, according to Sean.
Yeah. I mean, part of me is thinking, as you're talking about all the double champ stuff, and Alex Pereira, I guess, would have to go down to middleweight, which would be absurd in my opinion. I think the fight more likely takes place at light heavyweight. Do you think part of it is that? No, obviously not that he's thinking Sean Strickland's going to lose, but should Sean Strickland lose, do you think Alex Pereira is trying to hover around maybe potentially getting a fight with Dricus, or do you think he's just cornering his good friend Sean Strickland?
No, I think there's some ulterior motive there, at least. I mean, this guy's everywhere, right? And he always seems to
Yeah.
find himself in the right place. Like that photo of when Tom Aspinall is walking out, he's in the background. There was a similar one with John Jones after he won, and yeah, he always seems to know how to be at the right place at the right time for this kind of stuff. Like even think back of when Glover Teixeira lost and he was in the corner and that little thing with
Yeah.
Jamal Hill that kind of prompted it all. So yeah, he's always there. This guy seemingly at every event, he's beloved everywhere he goes. The questions of how could this trip impact his fight and his preparation are a whole other thing. He's done these type of unideal things before, though. He was in Australia just weeks before he stepped up at UFC 303. So he's done this before. But I do think there's a little bit something there that could fold into it. I mean, I don't know if Dricus wins, if he's get on the mic and like talk some shit to him when he's right there or something. But I think he's just in his position in case anything can kind of build. But yeah, I mean, if that fight ever gets built up to, I'd have to imagine it would be Dricus moving up. I can't see Alex Pereira being at 185 again.
Yeah, he seems adamant that he'd be fine doing it, but it just I don't believe it. And but what is there to gain for Alex Pereira, or do you think it's just the idea that Dricus is going to be undefeated in the UFC and would be like maybe to him like a worthy title challenger? Like what do you feel like there is to gain for Pereira potentially fighting Du Plessis if he beats Strickland?
Yeah, there isn't really. I mean, I guess it would be if he's moving down to be like a simultaneous 2-division champion, right? Which is like the most exclusive of the exclusive club guys who have done that at the same time, and then being able to defend one or both of those titles while holding both. So that would obviously be massive, but he's got heavyweight sitting right there where if you just wait things out for John Jones to pass,
Exactly.
like, you maybe have a path there. I don't know. Tom Aspinall might be a bigger obstacle than Dricus Du Plessis, both physically and literally and all that type of stuff. But yeah, I don't see much upside there, I guess is where the answer is. Like, it's just going to be a toll on his body. I don't think his chin is the same at 185. I think 205 is the perfect weight class. We just saw him post that video like yesterday of him weighing in on the scale or something. He was like 235 or something. So no, I don't want to see this man cut 50 pounds off his frame. Hard pass.
Yeah, and bigger fight as well. Aspinall would be, in my opinion. No, you'd think than Du Plessis?
Yeah, I mean, look, if Dricus blows the doors off Sean and beats Hamzat and Alex Pereira beats Ankalaev and then fights whoever, Yuri or whoever the next guy might be, then maybe at the very end of 2025, if both those guys do that, like we could be talking about a huge fight to start 2026, but that's a lot of ifs and buts and all that type of stuff. So like, let's get past the first step of these next 30 days and let's see if Dricus and Alex are both holding titles at the end of UFC 313. Then maybe we can talk about it. But I do think actually if Alex loses and you're like last option, you're like, hey, heavyweight is not a good idea now for whatever reason, how he loses to Ankalaev. Like Dricus wants me, let's go back to 185. They would definitely give him a title shot there against Hamzat or Dricus or Sean or whoever's holding the belt. So I think that would maybe like your last resort exit plan of like, I'm screwed at 205 now. Let's go back to 185.
Yeah, maybe. And let's wrap up with this because sometimes I find it hard to know whether the UFC would love Sean Strickland as a UFC champion again or hate it. What do you think?
I mean, I would like to think they would hate it, but their actions show they might love it, given the fact they did put him in this fight. They're putting the newspaper cover saying, someone please knock this guy out for his racist and bigoted and all these comments he made. They're pushing that forward. Clearly, they gave him this title shot when there was a more demanded option sitting right there. So I follow actions more so than words, right? And their actions show they're behind Sean Strickland and think he's a draw and a promotable guy. So no, I don't think there's going to be crying at the UFC offices if he gets his hand raised, maybe by some, but for the most important people, maybe not.
And when you hear Dricus, like we kind of knew that fight was going to happen between Dricus and Sean Strickland, but before and even when it became official, when you hear him say, I would have rather fought Hamzat, do you feel like it's maybe going to be a little bit hard for him to be motivated? I know he's going to say all that stuff on camera like he did on Embedded, like I'm going to put the greatest middleweight title performance ever and whatnot, but do you feel like it's a little bit hard maybe for him to get up and fight Sean Strickland again, or because it was a close fight, maybe him wanting to do it more emphatically?
Yeah, I do. I think it's the latter. And he had one really good answer at media day that was like right on the nose of that, being like, everyone said I was gifted the belt, that I shouldn't have lost this decision, or I shouldn't have won this decision. Like, I feel differently, but this is what all the people keep saying. So like, I'm going to silence all that talk. I'm going to put Sean Strickland behind me for good, and we're not going to have to worry about fighting this guy anymore. And I can kind of move on with my life. So I do think, at least from what he's saying, all the motivation is there for him to go kind of put a stamp on this rivalry and get it over with. So yeah, I do think everything is clicking for him, and he knows this is a hard fight. I mean, every time he says like, Sean Strickland can be a dickhead. I know some people hate him, but as a fighter, he's extremely defensively sound. He knows what he's doing in there, extremely experienced, and like, I can't fuck around with this guy basically.
And this might come off of a bit of a dumb question, considering that Dricus has the belt, but who do you feel like has more to lose, belt aside, in terms of their status in the middleweight division? We talked about Sean Strickland's popularity and probably the UFC's ability to build a storyline with him and anybody and throw him in a main event. Do you feel like Dricus has more to lose, or Strickland?
I think Strickland has more to lose, because if Dricus loses here, you can, say trilogy, I gave you your chance at redemption, give me mine. Like, you might be able to get that. I think if Sean Strickland loses here, like, I do think the Sean Strickland experience or experiment or whatever you want to call it, of like whatever has happened with his career since COVID hit and he got all those Apex main events and turned into this current version of himself that is extremely polarizing, it does not feel like it has the same juice around it as it did the first time he fought for a UFC title for this, for better or worse. So I think if he loses again here, it's kind of like the Colby Covington thing, right? Where it's like, okay, you're not in the title contention anymore. And like, how much more steam does what you're doing have behind it? Especially when I see in the comments here over and over, will Sean Strickland fight this time? Is he going to do anything besides jab and teep? Like, a lot of his character has overshadowed the fights themselves. He has had some good fights, performances. I'm not saying he's anything like negative on that front, but from an entertainment standpoint, there's often more to be desired. And if he's not winning and not at this top level, I think like it's going to be much more difficult for his whole thing to gain traction. So I do think in that sense, he has much more to lose here.
And when you hear the fans say, is he going to jab and teep? I totally understand why they're saying that. But their first fight, did you feel like it didn't live up to expectations? Like, what, in that regard, what was your thought of the fight?
It wasn't as good as I thought it was live when I got there. And I do think Sean's, I'm just being honest. I do think the cut over Sean's eye and the damage to Dricus's eye, like, made it feel like it was this crazy damage heavy fight. But it was really only like a few instances that led to all that. So yeah, and Dricus does, you kind of referenced it earlier. I think he is one of those guys that like his face, he just takes a shot and his eye blows up like GSP used to be, right? Like he would win all 5 rounds, but he literally looks like he just got in a car crash. And you come to the post-fight press conference and you're like, when did that even happen in the fight? So I think Dricus is one of those guys too. So yeah, that's kind of my thought on that.
So answer the fans before we actually wrap up. Is Sean Strickland going to try to jab and teep his way to a decision?
Yes. I mean, probably. He will do it. That is his first gear. So he's going to try to do that. And for all of our sakes, hopefully Dricus has a response that pushes him out of that first gear. Because if Sean can go out there and do that to you for 25 minutes with no resistance and win a 50-45 decision, of course he'll do that. But there's another opponent who is a world champion and very competent standing across the cage. And I think Dricus is going to make him show us more than that, or at least that is the hope. Or God bless us all, because it's going to be a late night and that fight will be at like 1 a.m. So fingers crossed.
1 a.m. Mike, have some feeling for others. 1 a.m. more like
11 a.m. for the Australian people. At least they can go drink the rest of the day away and forget the fight happened.
I'll take 11 a.m. over 8 a.m. But yeah,
yes.
All right.
You want to trade shift?
Sure.
Okay, we'll talk about that offline.
All right. Well, there you have it, guys. Mike, I appreciate you hopping on. Guys, don't forget to join Georgian Goes for the watch along. They'll be doing it for the main card, not the entire card, but they'll be watching the fights with you guys, having some fun. We've got the whole MMA Junkie team covering the fights, so enjoy them. Thank you guys so much for tuning in, and see you for the next pay-per-view.